we do have Daniel Lee on mono white tokens, as we mentioned. On the bottom, Jim Davis playing Jeskai Convoke. Both players are at 1-0 here, and it is Jim off to a start here with Warden of the Second Sky.
And Jim Davis was playing in some side events yesterday, fired off a nice 5-0 with this exact Jeskai Convoke deck. So he's tried and true with it, ready to go.
Yeah, and notably Daniel's deck listed as mono white tokens, and for the most part it is mono white. There is a very minor blue splash for Jace the Perfected Mind in this list, so that is why you do see the Meticulous Archive coming down in the lands area, but primarily this is really a mono white deck. Turn 2 for Jim, it is going to be the Resolute Reinforcements, creating a token, a little bit of a delay here, and then we do see Jim actually using all of those to activate the Warden of the Inner Skies ability, rather than get in for more or less inconsequential damage.
Yeah, Jim knows he's sculpting for a later, more explosive turn, going to go ahead and get that counter on it, get some, get a look at what's coming next turn. Seems to like it, keeping it on top. Let's see what he has here.
Yeah, the big thing you mentioned for Jim that he has to be aware of is turn 5. Can Jim present lethal, present enough pressure before Daniel is able to get to turn 5 and use one of those 4 copies of Sunfall that exist in the deck? Of course, Jim, in this closed decklist day 1, isn't fully aware of what Daniel may have, but I think it's very safe to assume when he sees the cards that Daniel plays, that Sunfall is going to be awaiting him.
Right, and in a closed decklist format, after seeing just 2 lands that are blue and white, Jim might be thinking this could be a heavy blue-white control deck. He might have something like temporary lockdown on the menu or something like that, but he does not have to worry about that in this matchup.
Yeah, so we do see almost the ideal turn 2 here for Jim. He does have the Percussionist as well as a Novice Inspector into the Knight Errant of Eos. So really just getting everything going, hitting 2 creatures, and notably the big creature that is going to help Jim race this potential Sunfall is the Imide's Recruiter that I believe he found off of that Knight Errant. On the end step, the Knight Errant is met by a Get Lost, and for Daniel, just an Enduring Innocence before passing the turn back to Jim.
Looks like Jim there flashed the cards he got off of the Knight Errant here, just as a reminder for Lee. And now he's going to figure out how to attack into this 2-1 lifelinker here.
Yeah, the big question for Jim, ideally he would have something like a Case of the Gateway Express here just to get rid of the Innocence out of the way. Of course, the Enduring Creatures do come back the first time they are removed as an enchantment, keeping that aura-like effect sticking around. They are sticky permanents, but as things stand, Jim is just going to start off by using the map tokens that he got from that Get Lost, as well as the clue token made from the Inspector to activate the Warden of the Inner Sky again. First test point for Jim. Does he have the 3rd land for the Recruiter? No, but he does have the Case of the Gateway Express. So the beatdown is going to start coming, and he does have enough creatures, so this will solve the case the very first turn, having that big attack, and still 1 turn away from Daniel being able to cast that Sunfall. You do see only 3 lands on his side of the board there.
Yeah, a nice attack here from Jim, chipping down, knowing he's a couple of turns away from the 5-mana sweepers. You've already solved the case. Now it's questionable if Jim even needs to add to his board. If he does, maybe just the Imidane's Recruiter so he doesn't expose himself to a sweeper, but we'll see how it plays out. Here's Beza, right?
Yeah, this is the big stabilizing mechanic for the mono white deck leading into Sunfall. This is the card that you are really using to bridge the gap, because trying to survive until turn 5 in a format like this standard where decks are so fast is typically a big ask, but having the 3 mana play of the Enduring Innocence as a lifelink creature into the 4 mana play of the Beza, gaining you some life if you're behind, creating a board presence, and we do see Daniel getting all of those effects here against Jim's board, means that now it's 17 with 4 lands on the battlefield, 3 blockers. Suddenly, even if Jim does go for the Imidane's Recruiter, he's not really presenting that lethal attack that he would like, and then how much is he overexposing to a Sunfall is the question.
Yeah, quite the catch-up card right there. Bridging the gap, and now Jim has to decide how to proceed in the face of this, knowing I probably can't kill you this turn. then I might have to fade the Sunfall, and then we have to figure out from there.
Yeah, notably, Warden of the Inner Sky activated again using those artifacts. It does have 3 counters on it now, which is the big point, because that does get the flying and the vigilance on it. So now you see the Warden coming in as a 4/5/5 with a case of the Gateway Express being solved there, coming in the air and essentially not being blockable.
Yeah, and he's got another case coming down that's going to be solved once again. So he's going to have a powerful board if there's some interaction on the other side. Otherwise, he can keep pressing the advantage here.
Yeah, for Daniel, it's about mitigating damage, trying to get to a point where you can cast the Sunfall safely and then pass the turn, knowing that Jim isn't able to present a lethal attack with an Imidaze Recruiter from hand. The big nice point for Daniel here, as that is the Sunfall, is Jim is stuck on 2 lands, so he's not going to be able to have that turn where he casts suddenly, let's say, Resolute Reinforcements into an Imidaze Recruiter. He's not even able to cast the Recruiter right now, and Daniel is still at an all-important 9 life, so that is a lot of padding to work with, and for Jim, this is going to be an uphill battle. He's used those 2 cases of the Gateway Express, but with a clear board, suddenly things have been mostly reset, and Jim still doesn't have that 3rd land to speak of.
Yeah, and even if he did, 3 mana, 3/2 haste, not what the doctor ordered in this situation.
Yeah, so where does the reset really start for Jim here in this situation?
Well, you have to find the land, and you have to find creatures to enable your game plan. So maybe a couple of token generators, possibly another Knight Errant, something to get you reloaded. But I have a feeling you're going to need another land to be able to have that explosive type of turn.
Yeah, so we do see the Spyglass Siren coming down, and a bit of a shortcut here as a map token is used on it. It does hit a Knight Errant Evios, not what he's looking for in the spot. Pretty desperate for land, so that does go in the graveyard. Had a land found, so that is a 2nd Spyglass Siren and a 3rd map token joining the board in reality now before things go back to Daniel. And, you know, the nice thing about having 2 solved cases here is every creature is a threat. These Spyglass Sirens are at baseline coming down as 3-power creatures, and it's not going to take many attacks from them to bring Daniel's 8 life down to 0. So Jim, just with 2 creatures, has replenished a close to lethal attack and has presented a board that Daniel may feel forced to once again Sunfall.
Yeah, especially with the evasion there. Those are not going to be able to be blocked by the Incubate token. Forces his hand once again to do another Sunfall. And now we just back in the same spot. What can Jim present?
All right, and we do see the Citadel coming down from Daniel. That is naming blue, so notably does have double blue available for Jace the Perfected Mind, though that is a card that is going to come down only if Daniel is either presenting lethal with it, which we are quite a ways away from, or once the board is fully stabilized, which at the moment, with the knowledge of that Imidaze Recruiter in Jim's hand, that is definitely not the case, and that is something that Daniel has to be aware of.
Yeah, and it's really in the deck to help out Fountain Port activations, but it does have a nice bonus there to cast Jace.
Yeah, we do see the Painter's Studio coming down. 2 cards off the top for Jim. He will be able to play them until his next turn, so hitting the land there as well as a Novice Inspector. Pretty perfect, as once again getting another clue token, getting that mana development, which is really important because Imidaze Recruiter by itself is a 5-power creature with haste thanks to those cases. So Imidaze Recruiter plus any other creature able to come down is a lethal attack if there are no blockers being presented.
Yeah, and that room can add another Anthem, as you said, making all these threats relevant. I think Jim would like to find some more evasion here because the Incubate tokens can present some blockers, but the Imidaze Recruiter does allow some bursty damage.
All right, well, the first turn where Jim is not presenting a super wide board or flying threats means that Daniel finds the window to resolve a Carrot Cake coming down. And then one of the big reasons to play this mono-white-esque deck is having access to the powerful removal spell Lay Down Arms. This is a card that you can't reliably play unless you are mono white, but when you are, it is quite powerful.
Yeah, by being able to leverage up to 18 planes in this deck, you can take down a ton of creatures. As the controlling deck, you don't care about giving them some life. Perfect answer for this type of deck.
All right, and we do get a glimpse into the level of comfort that Daniel is feeling in this position. One of the incubate tokens does get flipped face up, quote unquote, and gets into the red zone. So starting to work on Jim's life total. The lay down arms did give Jim 3 more life to work with, so was at a whopping 19. But Daniel undoing that damage with the 3 damage from the Phyrexian token, and Jim down to 16 with a lot of resources, but not much of a board in terms of threats at the moment.
Yeah, and Lee is taking the aggressor here now with his game plan rolling. If he starts finding some of these other pieces that, punctuate the deck, maybe a Caretaker's Talent or something, he can just start running away with the game. And not to mention getting a card off all these small creatures thanks to the enchantment.
All right, well, here's the Warden of the Inner Sky. It is one of the 1-mana plays that Jim was looking for, able to pair it with an Imidane's Recruiter if he so wishes. So that is a lethal attack that Jim could present. Of course, there is a blocker on Daniel's side, so it will not be a lethal attack ultimately. And the question for Jim is, how aggressive do you want to get here? What is the makeup of your hand, and how much do you want to spend rebuilding versus pushing?
Right, and he's got so many options with, the clue tokens. He's got the room he can unlock for an additional Anthem still. He's got scry effects and such with the Warden when he gets creatures going. So looks like he's going to pull the trigger on the Imidane's Recruiter now.
Yeah, giddy up with the Recruiter, and both creatures are coming in. Daniel doing the math, but with the 2 cases, this is definitely a lethal attack. So a block is required from Daniel here. Just wants to make sure, doubly sure, triply sure that there's nothing being missed here. But ultimately, you do have to throw this rabbit under the bus here in order to not take lethal damage.
Yeah, got to count up all of the extra pumps that are coming on this board. Sorry, rabbit.
Yeah, so that is 5 damage coming across. Daniel falling to just 3, and that is a scary position. But one thing that he can at least take solace in, that Imidane's Recruiter that he knew about, that is gone. So assuming Jim doesn't have another one in hand that Daniel doesn't know about, the ever-looming threat of haste has at least been somewhat answered.
Right. We've got another Enduring Innocence here. Another token, and now he's got lifelink on the board too, which is going to be nice if he gets in a spot where he has to chump again, get a life bonus.
Yeah, so we do see the Innocence come down, resolve, and then Daniel goes ahead and sacrifices the carrot cake. It is food, so gaining 3 life immediately from that sacrifice, but also more importantly, creating that 1/1 white rabbit that you get from the sacrificing of the cake, as well as when it enters, and that triggers both Enduring Innocences, so getting 2 more cards to work with. And this is the engine of this mono white tokens deck that can be so terrifying when it gets rolling. 3 blockers being presented from Daniel means that a removal spell isn't presenting lethal here. So for Jim, what he really needs is to get this Warden into the air. If he can get a 3rd counter on it here, then that is going to do the job of getting through, assuming Daniel has nothing, which for 1 mana at instant speed, I'm not sure can this mono white deck actually stop this lethal attack.
Yeah, and it's impressive to show how this deck can continue fighting through not only 1 Sunfall, but 2 removal spells, blockers. But when you have all these solved cases, all these evasive creatures are really troublesome.
Yeah, so Warden of the Inner Sky activated once, does have 3 more artifacts, so I think for Jim, this is a matter of thinking through all the possibilities here, but I believe if you tap your 2 map tokens, as well as the Imidane's Recruiter, and activate the other side of the Painter Studio, it is going to be a lethal attack coming in through the air.
Yeah, a rare opening both doors on a room.
Yeah, Room's already not a card type that you see too much of in the standard format. I think Unholy Annex has dropped a lot in popularity, and it was the most popular room seeing a lot of play, but in this specific deck, I do think that you do see the power of this room. So that is a Warden of the Inner Sky, having taken to the air with 3 counters, currently sitting at 6 power. A map token now makes it 7, and that is a lethal attack if Daniel is not able to remove it in any way, which, knowing what we know about the deck list, I don't believe there is a way to block or remove it here.
And it looks like Jim's going to go for it here. He just unlocked the door. He says, do you have anything over there?
Yeah, no attack from the Imidaze Recruiter, making sure not to allow a lifelink block, and that is going to be a lethal attack from Jim Davis in a position where Daniel Lee had done all but everything in his power to stabilize. Jim is able to find a way to get through and close out the game.
And that is an impressive display from this deck, being able to fight through that. A lot of aggressive decks and a lot of past standard formats would fold to a second sweeper like that on top of all the action that Lee was providing to the board. Jim, calm, cool, collected, just keeps grinding and still finds a way to get through.
Yeah, I think that is one of the main draws of this Jeskai Convoke deck that we've seen a lot of players who do opt and favor for it be drawn to is it has a lot of resiliency. It has a lot of refills. The fact that all of these sticky creatures that you're presenting are also coming with map tokens or clue tokens that allow for these refills means that the deck is never truly out of the game, and the aspect of haste provided by Imidane's Recruiter means that you're not just cold to removal spells, wrath spells like Sunfall by presenting a board and saying go.
Yeah, and the addition that all your pump effects are not tied to creatures, so when you get swept, you still have those sticking around to pump up your creatures.
All right, well, that is game one going to Jim Davis, and that means it is sideboard o'clock here. On the top of your screen, we get a look at Daniel Lee's sideboard. 4 copies of Exercise, 4 Elspeth Smite, 4 Rest in Peace, and 3 Authority of the Consuls, one of the reprints provided by Magic Foundations. And speaking of the haste that is coming from this Jeskai Convoke deck, Authority of the Consuls may be one of the ways to combat that strategy from Daniel. What are you looking at from this mono white token sideboard?
Well, Daniel Lee knows what he wants. This is a sideboard that says, I'm not messing around, and Authority of the Consuls looks very good in this matchup. You don't have to worry about the haste, as you mentioned, plus you're gaining a bunch of life from those creatures. And, I mean, it's not outside the possibility to bring in the Elspeth Smites as well.
Yeah, I think just knowing how that game played out, understanding that once you're able to survive to the point where you can wipe the board, the game plan from Jim is going to look very much like 1 or 2 creatures attacking in at any given point. So if you can stop the mass haste, if you can stop the board wipe, post-board wipe refills, then suddenly these individual removal spells like Elspeth Smite look a lot more appealing. Now, on the other side, at the bottom of your screen, we do see Jim Davis's sideboard. 3 copies of Split Up, as well as 3 Destroy Evil, 3 Protect the Negotiators, 2 Torch the Tower, 2 Painter Studio, and 2 Sheltered by Ghosts. What are you favoring in this position?
I think I like to Protect the Negotiators here. A counter spell for Sunfall is obviously huge. It gets to add to your board. I mean, you don't have to wait till turn 5 to get some value out of that, but loading up your board and then just sitting back and saying, do you have Sunfall? If you do, you just get Time Walk for 5 mana and my board's even better. Seems like a home run.
Yeah, really, we do see, like that previous game, Daniel is going to be forced to a position as long as Jim's early game is doing what he is trying to do in any reasonable basis. Daniel is going to be forced to fire off the Sunfall at the earliest opportunity. There is no luxury being provided to him to wait, try to play around, protect the negotiators, try to put yourself in a position where you feel safe, where you can resolve it. It is, okay, I have the mana, I have to fire this off to survive. So a card like Protect the Negotiators will go a long way. Looking at the rest of the sideboard, are you interested in anything like Painter Studio?
I was looking at that as probably the only other option, as just another way to grind later. Has another Anthem-esque effect, but being able to get some value out of that. Maybe you take out some of the removal because you don't want to go too heavy on that plan, as you know, Daniel can just flood the board.
Right. And notably, Daniel was on the on the draw for game 1. In a matchup like this, in any historic matchup where it is a controlling deck trying to get to a board wipe as soon as possible versus a creature-oriented deck, that play draw can be a massive difference maker. So definitely a bit of an advantage here in the second game being on the play. But unfortunately, because he lost that first game, should things go to a third game, he will once again be on the draw and have that disadvantage. So has to begin by capitalizing on the play afforded to him here and then try to break serve in the third game, essentially.
Yeah, and for Jim, that's just the classic aggressive deck advantage. You take game 1 when they're not ready. Sure, you might lose game 2 when they have all their interaction and they're on the play, but you're on the play game 3.
Yeah, winning that game 1 is all important. And all important for Daniel here. Jim is taking a mulligan while Daniel seems to be happy with his 7. So that is going to be a starting advantage here for the mono white tokens deck, in addition to being on the play this game.
Yeah, and Jim wants to make sure he has something that has a fighter's chance. You don't want to take a risk already being on the draw and being at the disadvantage. So he's going to go back to the well here. Hope to find something that can power up and probably look similar to what that last game was by having so many refills.
Yeah, this Jeskai Komoot deck definitely is one that mulligans decently well, just given the number of refills that are available to it. If you are just able to get that early curve going, you are in a much better position. So 6 is the name of the game for Jim Davis, and Daniel Lee once again kicks things off with a meticulous archive, putting another archive in the graveyard, and I've seen this start before. Warden of the Inner Sky, turn 1 for Jim Davis.
Yeah. It's one of the marquee draws of the stack is having that card so you can start creating some extra advantage, manipulate your draws. Some of your other explosive draws are like Novice Investigator into Gleeful Demolition for a really explosive start, but this is probably what you would prefer here in this matchup.
All right, and it is going to be not Painter's Studio, but the other side here coming down, as we did theorize that Jim may be bringing in more copies of that. Only 1 in the main deck, 3 here potentially post-board, and that is going to be the play for turn 2, just allowing Jim to get an attack in for 2. Now, this is not one of the more explosive draws that we've seen from the Jeskai Convoke deck, but it is a draw that allows Jim to potentially refill by opening up the Painter's Studio next turn, or the following turn if you would like, and try to grind against the mono white deck.
Yeah, it's a nice way to have a solid curve, even if you don't have all your explosiveness.
All right, for Daniel, it is an Enduring Innocence coming down, so a lifelink blocker that is sticky and able to come down, block, potentially just stop Jim cold in his tracks, and then stick around for more value later. This card is one of the MVPs of this mono white token set.
Yeah, you just get to generate value no matter what, even if it dies, and then taking down a creature and getting some life, not going to have any problem with that.
All right, so we'll wait and see what Jim Davis is looking to deploy here. I did see a copy of that Protect the Negotiators in hand, so he does have access to some interaction here in the post-board game. 3rd land coming down, and we'll see how much Jim wants to leave up here. And he's going to start things off with Mockingbird. Now, this is a card that I've been wanting to talk about for a while because it's not a card that I think we saw players immediately adopt out of Bloomborough. It feels like maybe a later discovery from the set. I can say going back to the World Championship, I don't think we saw any copies of Mockingbird floating around anywhere. And now it seems to be in the Pixie decks. It seems to be in the Convoke decks. Players have really come to enjoy this card in the format, as we do see it coming down as a copy of Enduring Innocence. So Jim taking advantage of his opponent's threat. But why have players really started adapting this Mockingbird tech?
Well, there's just so much flexibility. You can do all kinds of things, and the Dimir midrange deck has even picked it up as 1 or 2 copies as just another 1-drop enabler to let you get the ball rolling. But here, as you can see, Jim was studying that Enduring Innocence, picking it up. I think we know Jim knows what that card does, but he wants to make sure, what if I copy this? What all am I going to get?
Yeah, and it is a pretty good copy for Jim, as he does have his own bevy of small creatures able to come down. So he does have an ability to get that card advantage out of the Innocence as well, and kicking things off here with a Knight Errant.
Looks like he finds another Warden and a Novice Inspector here. Not too bad, a little grind. And Daniel got to put the time counters there on the Overlord, getting 2/1 flyers there as it counts down.
Yeah, very impending Overlord of the Mistmoors there, making 2 insect tokens. Those are 2/1 flying tokens, so very much hefty tokens, both in terms of blocking and presenting pressure as they are flyers. So that is going to be something that Daniel is able to really use. A lay down arms coming down as well. That is going to answer Jim's copy of the Mockingbird copying the Innocence. So Daniel very much keeping Jim's board in check and presenting threats of his own here.
Yeah, and taking care of it long term, so there's no way come back.
All right, so these are those insect tokens getting it in the air. So 4 damage coming across here from Daniel. And another copy of Lay Down Arms. That'll deal with the Warden of the Inner Sky. So Jim's board whittled down to just a Knight Errant of Eos as a time counter gets taken off of the impending Overlord.
Yeah, and now that he's got the board pretty much under control, just a 4/4 with no other real abilities on the board now you can start beating down in the air.
All right, so we are getting a better look at Jim's hand. I believe that is a copy of Gleeful Demolition. The two one-drop creatures we just saw get picked up. Two copies of Destroy Evil, if I saw correctly. That'll be a nice answer for the Overlord. And he does, I believe, still have that copy of Protect the Negotiators that I may have caught a glimpse of earlier. So a decently reactive hand from Jim, but one that will allow him to not be scared of all of these big threats that Daniel is presenting in the next few turns.
Yeah, so we see Jim did go a little heavier on sideboarding, picking up those Destroy Evils, playing a little bit more of a reactive game. Jim's no stranger to playing long games, and he's suited himself for that with his sideboarding. Interesting here that Daniel chumped with the Enduring Innocence on the 4/4, just keeping that enchantment around and preserving the life total.
Yeah, I think definitely the life total is the big talking point here. We saw what happened in the previous game with Daniel getting too low, lower than he probably would have liked. And perhaps this is a sign to Jim that Daniel is representing a Sunfall in hand, just wanting to get that creature off the board. Sunfall does exile, so Daniel not wanting to lose his innocence to his own Sunfall, getting that into enchantment form, and then saying, all right, now do you want to commit both of these one drops that I saw the previous turn? Are you going to play a bit more conservatively and only present one? Well, that works for Daniel. He's got an Overlord impending as well as two flying creatures. And this really does feel like the best of both worlds if you're in Daniel's position.
Yeah, and if anything telegraphs the Sunfall more, we see the Fountain Port sacrificing one of the 2/1 flyers to draw a card there. I think the writing's on the wall there. But Jim is in a squeeze here where he's still, even if he knows the Sunfall's there, you're going to have to apply pressure in some way and put your guard down, or just sit here and play one creature at a time while Daniel has the advantage, because that's the squeeze you get put in with all this reaction. You can't pressure as much.
There's the Sunfall. The question is, does Jim care enough about this to protect the Negotiators? We know he left it up. So if you're not leaving it up for the Sunfall, what are you leaving it up for in Jim's position? I don't believe he has a copy of something like Resolute Reinforcements in hand to refuel here. So I would be surprised if Jim doesn't fire it off, but you do see him thinking about it more than you would potentially expect in a position like this.
Yeah, because you have to think, if you don't fire it off here, what are you waiting for? And then how are you going to have the mana to supply enough pressure to keep it up so that it has leverage later?
Yeah, so that is the Protect the Negotiators fired off. Sunfall going to the graveyard. Again, not the best Sunfall in the world, but it was going to get the job done here. So now we're going to go back to Jim Davis. Just 2 creatures to his name, 3 lands on the battlefield, and we'll see what he's able to cobble together here. We know he has a reactive hand. We know there's 2 copies of Destroy Evil, as well as, I believe, a Gleeful Demolition in it. And the question is, where is the rest of the pressure going to come from?
Yeah, when do you use a demolition on that clue token? Do you decide you want to draw a card with it instead to find more action? Would you be happy with just 3 1/1s? We'll see how he navigates it here.
Alrighty, step 1. I believe this is that Warden of the Inner Sky that we saw Jim pick up earlier. It chose not to deploy the previous turn in favor of that Protect the Negotiators, but now it can come down on the board, and Jim looking at that Shivan Reef in order to potentially cast that Gleeful Demolition, but starting off with just getting a counter on the Warden and getting that Scry going.
Yeah, you could see him get ready to tap that, but decided he wanted to use the clue token as one of the 3 tappers for the Warden. Now we'll probably blow it up, and I think it's Jim here deciding, all right, now's time. We're going to load the board up with some creatures, hope Daniel doesn't have another sweeper, and then can go from there.
Yeah, he's gone through the first Sunfall, so now saying that the second Sunfall, I am not going to play around it, considering I can't really in this position. I do have to present some kind of board advantage here. So just for everyone at home, as we get the token situation sorted out here, the Gleeful Demolition took care of that clue token, made 3 creatures. They went into the Warden of the Inner Sky, so they are tapped. Jim got another Scry here, and then came through with the Knight Errant for 5 damage. And this is what Jim really did not want to see, was the second copy of Sunfall here, as that's going to reset the board, get Daniel a large Incubate token, and this Overlord is now going to come from Impending onto actual creature form alongside the 7th mana Incubated token. We know Jim has 2 Destroy Evils for both of these creatures, but that is all of his answers, and Daniel still has more resources to work with.
Yeah, and it puts Jim in a spot where you have to do that now because there's so much pressure, so much advantage, and you're not deploying anything. So yeah, you're answering these creatures, but they've generated value already, came from a sweeper, and then Daniel just gets to keep going.
Yeah, and with not having access to his 4 lands, he can't even destroy evil both of these creatures. So it is really going to be Daniel having the ability to at least attack with that incubate token for 7 if he so chooses. And he's going to start things off with a Beza here. Now, not the most exciting Beza in the world, as Daniel will have the board, but at least it is going to be some life gain. Though Jim can, interestingly, use the Pain land here in the Shivan Reef if he wants to change the life total values.
Yeah, it feels like a little old Death Shadow day using your Pain lands to manipulate your life total. And he was going to have to take care of that Overlord anyway before the attack step because you don't want to give him the 2 extra tokens.
Yeah, so the Shivan Reef play does make the life totals tied, so no extra life gain, excuse me, for Daniel from the Beza, but now he knows the coast is clear, so Incubate becomes Phyrexian, and 7 damage coming across, knocking Jim Davis nearly half of his life total down to 8. Back Jim's way, we know there's a second copy of Destroy Evil in hand. That can answer the Phyrexian, but the big bad Beza will still remain, and Daniel very much has the board here.
Yeah, Jim's going to run out of removal spells at this point with all the haymakers that Daniel's throwing, but we'll see how Jim can react.
All right, and we do know, okay, it is going to be Destroy Evil, dealing with the Beza, allowing Jim to get through. I think I saw another copy of Gleeful Demolition. So it's possible Jim's plan here is actually be aggressive and try to chump the Phyrexian. Say that I have these 3 tokens, I have this Painter Studio, the other side, excuse me, available pumping this board. So if I can just present 1 blocker and get through for, let's say, 6 damage while you're attacking, this is a race that I can try to put together a win. And this is very much Jim playing to win rather than playing not to lose.
Right, and that's what great players do. They're in a position, they figured out where the game is going, they know how they have to try to win the game, and Jim identifies this is the avenue I have to go down. And, you know, the Phyrexian Incubate token just basically has keyword big on it and nothing else, so you can just throw these goblins under the bus.
All right, so going back Daniel's way, we do see things starting off by making a fish token. And the inevitable attack, nothing Daniel is going to do other than that, and we'll see how things go from there. The fish token, of course, being made in order to draw a card off the Enduring Innocence before making any meaningful choices. And now that we've gone back Jim's way, Daniel making another fish in order to get that card and saying, all right, I have some blockers. What are you going to do here?
Yeah, and this is a powerful engine, being able to generate blockers, draw cards, all with just your lands now.
Yeah, this is very much, once the mono-white deck is stabilized and rolling, this is how you see it bury the opponent in card advantage and resources, is having access to hard to answer card types, whether it be enchantment or land. And maybe one of the reasons why Jim really did bring in those copies of Destroy Evil in addition to what he was bringing in. Really just saying that, okay, I'm making blockers and drawing cards and having answers, and you can only do so much in a given turn.
Right, you're going to run out of ways to interact with all this. And notably in this game, the texture is a lot different because Jim doesn't have all these extra solved cases of the Gateway Express to pump up all these creatures, making all the smaller creatures relevant in the late game. He's only got the 1 room unlocked to really do that pumping, so the threats are not quite as severe.
All right, so Painter Studio is opened and does hit a land as well as another Novice Inspector. Great. Is able to play both of those, get in for 2. So Daniel goes down to 10 life there. But Jim not able to attack with the other goblins because of those fish tokens. So things going back Daniel's way, and it does feel like a stable board is being presented here.
Yeah, and even if Daniel doesn't play any spells, he still has access to this line of play each turn, creating these tokens, drawing cards, and Jim still has to fight his way through it.
But how about potentially the best spell in the situation here? The 1-of copy of Virtue of Loyalty coming down, as well as Ardenvale Fealty. So making a knight, drawing a card, and getting the Virtue down suddenly means that Daniel is now able to play offense and defense and start growing these creatures. And the door is very much being closed on Jim Davis.
Yeah, there's no key to unlock this door for Jim, I would say, in this situation with the we get to say now who's the pump deck now.
Yeah, and I think that is what I was going to focus on as the way Daniel completely shuts the door. One, Authority of the Consoles, I think, was going to get the job done. A second, and this feels nigh unwinnable for Jim Davis. And I believe sooner or later we are headed to a game 3 here.
Yeah, if the writing wasn't already on the wall, 2 copies to really hammer home the point that says, yeah, you're not going to get in here.
Yeah, haste is off the table. I have the board, I have the answers, and that is how I'm going to get the job done.
But Jim is never one to concede early. He's going to fight. So if there's a way to win, he's going to try to find it.
Yeah, ultimately, you are going to make the most of every match. In the back of the players' minds, they do have to keep that clock in mind. We do have it on the screen there. 14 minutes remaining. So in what has been a grindy matchup, that is going to become a consideration going into the third game, but not a reason to concede too early if you do feel like you have a chance in the match. So we'll see when that is going to become a consideration for Jim here. As going back Daniel's way, he is going to continue taking the actions necessary to present the pressure.
Right, and there's the namesake card of the Mono White Tokens deck, the Caretaker's Talent, to really hammer home what's going on here. But, I mean, I think Jim says maybe there's a combination of draws off the top of my deck that allows me to punk him out here and steal the game, so I'm going to play to that. And we're going to see what he does.
Yeah, Resolute Reinforcements joining the battlefield on the end step. Daniel saying, okay, I gain 4, carry on, untap my creatures, put these counters on. Every creature that Daniel is presenting is in full Abyss mode now, requiring a block or an answer from Jim. And Jim has seen enough, so that is going to be game 2 being taken by Daniel Lee. It wasn't easy, it didn't come quickly, but it was inevitable at that point, and that means we are going to game 3.
Yeah, and that does show that Jim's deck has a lot more interaction in a post board than we expected. He brought in the Destroy Evils along with the Protect the Negotiators. So he's going to have to find the mix with his opening hand here to not only apply pressure, but also have that disruption.
Now, here's an interesting question that I do want to think about from Jim's position. You're going into game 3, you're on the play, and you know at least somewhat that you're going deeper into the round. Time is ticking. And this early in a large, nearly 1,500 person open tournament, what you really don't want to be picking up is a draw. Do you sideboard in a way here that is leaning more aggressive and less reactive in order to give yourself the best chance of potentially winning this game rather than being reactive and trying to stall the game into a position? Or do you say, my best chance is to stick to my game plan and I'm going to do just that?
It could be a possibility. I'd be interested to know what Jim's thinking, because by the time they start their match, we'll probably have 10 minutes. But, you know, if Jim believes the matchup swings his way, if he sideboards in this manner, I think he's going to stick to his guns. Now, the question I have, he's on the play. Does that alter how you sideboard?
Right. Are you going to be less reactive just inherently regardless of time because you are on the play, you are wanting to be the aggressor? You can't really afford to have draws where you're not able to get your Knight Errant down because you have multiple Destroy Evils and Protect the Negotiators gumming up your hand.
Right, and it's nice to have those Destroy Evils when those giant creatures get to the board, but I think if I was in Jim's spot, I might take those back out unless he has absolutely nothing that would help affect the board. I would try to get those out, make sure I'm on the board early, and just really rely on those Protect the Negotiators to make sure you don't get swept and try to steal the game quickly.
All right, well, sideboarding is over, and we are onto the board here as Jim Davis did kick things off with a Spyglass Siren. On the other side, Daniel Lee, probably the most important card to have on turn 1, Authority of the Consoles. And you can see already Daniel making it very clear what the game plan is here, as Laydown Arms just immediately goes after that Spyglass, saying, I do not want you to get any sort of board position. Of course, the 2-mana pass on turn 2, a near face-up Resolute Reinforcements coming out from the Jeskai Convoke deck. That comes down on the end step, and things go back Jim's way. The flash creature, a nice way of getting around the authority, being able to untap and get in with those creatures.
Right, and it's one thing to have Authority of the Councils in your deck and play it late in the game, but having it on turn one where it's going to provide the biggest advantage, that's nice to see.
Yeah, so back Jim Davis's way, that map token is going to be the activation, it looks like. Not a good glimpse of his hand so far, so we're not sure if he's looking for lands like the previous games or spells, but this gives us a glimpse as Knight Errant of Eos does stay on top, and 3 damage coming on through. Daniel did have the second land and a pass. Third land for Jim, and another pass. I'm very curious if he has a second copy of Resolute Reinforcements here, or if it is just something like Protect the Negotiators that is being the pass.
It would make sense with the Knight Errant on the top of the deck staying there. It would seem pretty natural to just instep put in some more tokens, and as you see, there it is.
All right, it was just a carrot cake for Daniel, but all importantly, no third land, and I think that is exactly what Jim wanted to see, to know that the shields are down and the way is open here, because Daniel's game plan, we've seen it really revolve around the fact that he wants to get to Beza, he wants to get to Sunfall, and every turn that he misses a land drop means that he is further and further away from being able to do that. So for Jim, now he gets to almost overcommit to the board, knowing that we're too far away for Daniel from that sort of position. And not the best Knight Errant, only hitting a Warden, but the board pressure is mounting.
Yeah, and once you see he doesn't have the extra land, you get to overcommit. He's so far away from his really impactful plays, and as someone who plays a lot of aggressive decks, there's nothing I like seeing more than my control opponent not hit a third land. You kind of do that fist pump in your head, and you're just like, why don't we just stay at 2 and we'll wrap this up?
Yeah, you change your mindset completely about what your opponent is presenting, and all premises of I'm not going to play too much into the board, I'm going to keep up, let's say, Protect the Negotiators. We don't know if it's in Jim's hand or not. Those go out the window. It is all about I need to go, 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 and capitalize on this window that I am being given.
Right, and unlike game 1 where it was unclear what deck Daniel was on, now you know you probably don't have to worry about something like Temporary Lockdown or a 3-mana way to clear the board.
All right, second lay down arms from Daniel, getting rid of that Warden, but the rest of the board sticks around, and unfortunately still missing that third land drop. So Jim Davis untapping with 5 creatures now, and that lone rabbit on the other side trying to hold down the fort is looking more and more like it is not getting the job done.
Yeah, that one's going to go into the rabbit stew and fall under the 4/4.
5 damage coming across as the rabbit, just a chumper, and Imidane's Recruiter being sent to the adventure zone. So here come the troops, and next turn, that is going to be a very, very imposing attack coming across. So Daniel needs a miracle, and a shake of the head from him. I don't know if a miracle exists.
After being terrorized by Imidane's Recruiter in Wilds of Eldraine Limited, I know the feeling of seeing that card in the Adventure Zone, because it means, oh, your board is already so good, you can just keep adding and then bring this down to provide even more hasty damage.
Yeah, Daniel sacking the carrot cake, getting the token, getting the life, still at 20, but now you're facing down 7 creatures. The Imidane's Recruiter itself will come into the battlefield tapped, but not really relevant when you're getting that Anthem effect.
Right, it doesn't get to attack, but it's going to provide your board 7 more damage.
All right, here comes everyone. Rabbit gets in front of, you would assume, the biggest attacker, and that would still be, I believe, 15 damage coming across if I've done my math right. So Daniel losing nearly 3/4 of his life with a chump on the Knight Errant.
Yep. And again, Daniel's stuck on 2 lands. I'm not sure what he's drawing to at this point to try to peel out of it, but he's going to look.
Yeah, much like the previous game, especially with no next game to think about. There's no reason for Daniel to concede too early here, but given what we know of the makeup of the deck, no temporary lockdown and no board, a lot of get losts are not going to get the job done, and Daniel reveals the unfortunate position that he found himself in, and 2 lands not going to work here as Jim Davis takes down the match, moves on to 2-0